Good afternoon, and welcome back to another episode of Cooking and Plaid, where all we need is an idea, a sharp knife, and a plaid shirt. And today, we're gonna go ahead and make one of my favorites, meatloaf, or as I like to call it, not your mama's meatloaf. So with some video magic here, I'm gonna go ahead and very quickly take apart this garlic. What I'm doing is called mincing. So, hand on the back of the knife to add a little bit of support there. And then I'm just going to chop it up really fine, really fast. And then once that's done, I'm going to go ahead, throw it into a bowl, and start getting a pan preheated. Now it's time to go ahead and start working on the rest of the vegetables. With these carrots, what I'm going to do is get them into a dice. They don't have to be particularly even. Otherwise, if I was looking at an even cut, I'd cut that carrot into a perfect square or rectangle, and then I'd make my slices off of that, make sure that my edges are nice and straight. But for something like this, doesn't really matter. Cooking at home, who cares? I love doing the water test on a pan. You want to make sure that the pan's hot, and I find that running my hand over the top to feel a bit of heat just doesn't do it justice. So, put a little water in my hand and give it a flick at the pan. And if I hear a sizzle, well, I know that she's hot and ready to go. So with this garlic, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and give it a light saute. You want to be careful not to overcook it, which is really easy to do. Now, for video purposes, just because I don't want to move the camera around too much, I'm making sure that all the vegetables are getting done one at a time. It's adding time onto my own cooking, but making it easier for me to film it. So with this, garlic specifically, I'm going to just lightly saute it, and I'm kind of sweating it, getting those flavors out of it. And then the second that she's cooked through and not overcooked, which is so easy for people to do, I'm going to pull it, throw it into a bowl, bam, done, set it off to the side, and wait for me to put together everything else. And now it's time for me to go ahead and start grabbing some mushrooms and give those a chop. Everybody has a personal preference. Some people don't like mushrooms. If they're not your taste, that's cool. Don't use them. For everybody else that does like mushrooms, well, I find for something like this, you could leave them into slices, which is fine. I like going with the rough chop look. It fits in nicer in something like a loaf. You don't have an entire slice to bite down into. So, like I said, cut it into the slices, and then I'm just running a knife nice right through the middle of it. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until I kind of hit that consistency that I'm looking for. Onions. Simple to cook, simple to eat, not so simple to peel. So I find what works for me is making that really gentle cut right up the middle. And then from the middle, I'm pulling and I'm taking one layer off of each side. And it just makes it that much more fast for me. Celery, same deal as carrot, cutting it into segments, and then I'm going to dice it really small. You can see how I'm using the knife there. Well, it depends on how comfortable you are with a knife. I like my hands really far back because I want to keep my fingers nice and safe. Other people, when they use the claw to hold their food, they like that knife running up and down the back of their forefinger, or at least that's how I was taught to do it. I could never get used to it, and I never had any issues with the way that I use it, so, that's just sort of the way I handle it. Time to go ahead and get these mushrooms started. Now me, for personal flavor, I like my butter in there. The mushroom's going to go ahead and absorb all that butter. I've heard the argument made that it should be started with oil because the butter can burn, and then you finish the mushroom with butter. Me, I'm still in between on that. I mean, I don't want my mushroom to taste like oil. I want my mushroom to taste like mushroom and butter. So the argument's still up in the air. But like I said in previous videos where I work with mushroom, I like my mushroom really well developed and getting to the point of being overcooked. So that's exactly what I do. And now here comes the onion. So with the rest of these vegetables, onion, carrot, celery, we're just going to sweat them. So we want them to finish, we want to start cooking them in the saute and then get those flavors to begin to develop. But we want them to finish cooking in the actual meatloaf. So with the mushroom, I gave that about 15 minutes in the pan. Onion and carrot at the same time. Onion can go forever. Carrot, you got about, 15 minutes in the pan. So at this point, it's probably been on for about 5 minutes. I've just been giving it the odd flip. Celery and garlic go in dead last. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up that flavor. I'm going to give it a quick toss there. And I'm going to give it about another minute. And then she's time to come off, go into a bowl. And then I'm going to leave it off to the side to cool down. Now it's time for the best part. Gonna go ahead and work on this meatloaf. There is no such thing as exact measurements in my world. So I started off with bullseye barbecue sauce. I like that it has a really rich, deep, bold flavor. Don't have to use it. You could use a different barbecue sauce, but it really does add to that dish. Next, I'm going to use Dijon mustard. Again, a really nice flavor. I don't like super spicy stuff, so for someone that does like spicy stuff, would probably use a couple of tablespoons. It's not for me, so I will use a teaspoon. Then we have Liam Perkins. I mean, really, it goes fantastic with any kind of meat product that you do. It's just, a staple on any kind of meat. And then we got soy sauce. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to fill that soy sauce up with the cap. I assume that there's about a teaspoon in there, which looks to be about right. I mean, there is no exact science to a meatloaf. I just open up the fridge and grab whatever I happen to have in there for flavoring. The egg, well, don't really need it, except you need all these products to bind and hold together, so that's what that goes in there for. Now it's time to add a little bit of sage. Sage is an easy one to mess up. If you get the right amounts, she is flavorful. But if you add too much, she just tastes like sage. So I go with a pinch to a dash. Now it's time for that Clubhouse Italiano. I give a generous handful there. Can't really go wrong with it. And where I could go with regular salt, I decided to go with this gigantic container of seasoning salt that I bought who knows how long ago. Whatever it adds, I'm not sure, but it is seasoned salt. It usually goes just on meat for me, but for this, I'm going to go ahead and be very careful because you treat it like salt because it is salt. So a couple of pinches. Now it's time to go ahead and start mixing up this meatloaf. If you have more in the fridge, you can really just throw in anything that you think is going to go well. Chances are it probably will. Where it starts getting a little tricky is how to take this really wet, soppy, meaty mess and actually turn it into something that's going to end up being a meatloaf, but not a dry hunk of bread. So what I generally do is I keep some really cheap breadcrumb in the cupboard just for these kind of situations. But, and we can't forget those vegetables. Time to get those worked in there. But when it comes to adding in your actual breadcrumb, you don't have to have a thing that actually says breadcrumb on the side of it. You could take some slices of bread, toast them, throw them in a bag, toast them well, throw them in a bag, crumble it up, and you could use that. You could use potato chips. I've heard of people using Dorito. But really what we need is we need something that's going to suck up, absorb a lot of that moisture. So, speaking of which, whoops. No bread in the house, no breadcrumb in the house, but what I did happen to have was a package of panko breadcrumb. Don't love using panko breadcrumb for something like this. It is a bit more expensive than regular breadcrumb, and it is the creme de la creme when it comes to deep frying anything. So make sure that you always have a package of that available to you anytime that you want to deep fry. Random side note about panko, turns out that it's just electrocuted bread. Hey, who would have known? So now that I got that breadcrumb in there, all I'm doing is I'm folding it over so I can tell that there isn't enough because it keeps on falling apart on me. So I'm going to keep on folding it over into itself, folding it over, and I'm just waiting for it to be able to hold together so it can support itself under its own weight. So I think the secret to a perfectly moist meatloaf is to only add in enough breadcrumb to absorb all the extra liquid in there and make sure that you don't add in any extra. And it looks like we made ourselves a gigantic meatball, which means that we do not need any more breadcrumb. Now it's time to go ahead and grease up the pan. If you happen to have a really good non-stick one, I'd still go ahead and oil it up just in case. So it's just a dab of extra virgin olive oil while I give it a wipe out with a paper towel. If you don't have the oil, you can go ahead and use parchment paper, same deal. It won't crisp up on the sides, but it will give it easier time for it to fall out. And then when I put the meatloaf in there, I'm just going to form it with my hands to fit that pan. That pan specifically is big enough to hold almost twice the size, so perfect. It's going to sit down below the edge. If I was going to make a much bigger one, then I would literally just throw that pan on top of a sheet pan, throw it in the oven, and that way if it makes a bit of a mess, who cares? It's just going to fall onto the sheet pan. Now, with this meatloaf specifically, I decided to do a egg wash for it. So with an egg wash, I'm just going to use the egg white, get that into a little bowl, and then I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of water. And then I'm going to mix this thing forever. I'm going to give it a really, really, really good mix. Because if you notice, in the egg white, it likes to clump together, but when you brush the top of anything with egg white, you definitely don't want clumping together, or you're going to end up with a big white clump of whatever it is that you're trying to put a glaze onto. So I only put the meatloaf in for 15 minutes. Pulled it out, time to put on that egg wash. While it was out, I actually took the temperature and it came out to 125 degrees, which was perfect by my estimates because I did 1 pound of lean ground beef And I figured it would be about 35 minutes in the oven. It looks to be like that turned out to be pretty accurate. My oh my, does that not look delicious? So even though I greased up that pan, it does crisp up along the sides, so I'm going to very gently run a butter knife along the edges. Really gently, don't want to scratch my pan. Give it a flip, give it a tap, give it a turn, and holy moly, she came out on the first shot. Lost a little in the bottom of the pan, but hey, can't go for perfection. Gonna give it a gentle flip. Whew, look at that glaze. Well, that's about it for today, folks. Gotta admit, she turned out spot on. Questions, comments, suggestions? Go ahead, drop me a line and let me know. Until next time, keep on cooking.